So, can you please tell me a little bit about yourself, your name, and where you live and work?
Yeah, my name is Louisa Jewell, and I work in Toronto, Canada.
And what do you do?
I'm a consultant, facilitator, and speaker. So primarily what I do is I work with organizations to create positive and productive workplaces. So I work primarily with leaders to create a corporate culture or an organizational culture. So I work with nonprofit organizations, government, for-profit organizations as well. And I'll work with leaders to create a corporate culture that will, create more positive interactions within the organization and a positive climate that promotes productivity and higher levels of performance. But I also work with teams at all levels as well who want to just, again, take their teamwork to the next level.
Right. And what's your background for doing that?
So I actually have a business degree. So I started off in business. I started off selling computers many years ago, and I ended up consulting with many different organizations around the world. And that's when I decided to become my own consultant and do my own work. So for 16 years now, I have been working as an organizational consultant and working in the whole area of facilitating change within organizations.
Right. And how did you get into positive psychology?
Well, I started a survey across Canada at a website called whydidyougo.com, and I asked people, it was basically a national exit interview, and I asked people why you left your last job, if you left your last job in the last 12 months. And I decided as well to add a few other surveys in there, which is, if you hate your job and you stay, why do you do that? Because I never understood that. And also I asked a question, if you absolutely love your job, tell us why. And I'm really glad that I asked that question, because I thought if I took a look at why people left, that I would fix those problems in organizations and then people would be happy. But when I looked at the people who were really happy, I realized that they were happy for different reasons. It wasn't just about fixing the problems. You needed to have a whole new perspective. So this is when I realized that I need to know more about human engagement from a psychological level, and so I started to explore more. And then I found Martin Seligman's Learned Optimism, and that's when I fell in love with the whole study of positive psychology. And then I started to read everything I could after that, and then that's when I decided to do the MAPP degree.
Right. And do you also have training and coaching?
So all of my coaching is done in an organizational setting. I don't do one-on-one coaching. I do consult at the executive level. So, if I'm working on a project with an organization, I will gather information from many different sources, and then I will go back to the leaders of the organization and consult. I think it's more of a consulting role than it is a coaching role. And then all of my positive psychology interventions and things that I do with organizations are done in a group setting.
Right. And what types of groups do you usually work with?
So all different kinds of groups, nonprofit, government, for-profit, any kinds of teams. It's very diverse. Right.
Yeah. And what issues do they want to work on?
Well, typically people will call me, I would say, the low-hanging fruit, or the greatest reason why people would call me is when they have morale issues on the team. So they've just gone through a major change, and people are, really not happy. They're really feeling dejected. They're not feeling valued in the organization. Sometimes we call that survivor syndrome, when there's been huge downsizing, for example. And so that's when people might call. Or if the team is having some conflicts, then that's when people would usually call me. But other organizations, knowing they're going to go through a change, are proactive and say, we're going to go through this big change. Can you come and help us, give us some tools so that we can see this change without much negativity, without having such a an effect on our people. So some organizations are proactive and call me as well.
Right. And so what do you do when they call you?
So the first thing that I do when organizations call me is I actually have a whole needs assessment process. So I speak to many different people in the organization and at all different levels. And I make sure on my list of people that I include the people who are disgruntled as well as the people who are happy there. And I ask I do ask some deficit-based questions in terms of what do they feel the challenges are, but I also ask appreciative questions around, so what do you feel is going well? And if this was to be the best place for you to work, what would it look like if you came in every day and this was, the most inspiring, the most productive, team you've ever worked on? What would that look like to you? And so by getting both perspectives, I'm able to, like for example, I had one team that, in fact, through my interviews, I found that there was a bully, someone who was bullying people on the team. And when I took that back to the leadership, they thought that the bullying issue had been dealt with. And they didn't know that it was a continuing problem. And so to them, even just that assessment interview, even though I hadn't even started my work, was already of benefit to the organization to really understand. Because you can't take a company forward if you have things that are so destructive to the organization that are not being dealt with. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times, leaders are well-intentioned, but they, for example, in this organization, the leaders were also afraid to approach the bully. And so sometimes they're afraid to do what is right for the organization.
Right. And when you do the interview, is that one-on-one or telephone, or what do you do?
It's one-on-one. So, if I can't reach somebody because they're in a remote location, then I might do a telephone conversation and do an interview. But typically what I like to do is I like to schedule a time when I come in, and then I have the interviews all scheduled back to back so that I can maximize my time there. Right. And depending on the engagement, I might do a 20-minute interview with each person, or I might do an hour interview with each person. And again, it's at all different levels, so I get all different perspectives, because often what the leaders tell me are, usually I get hired by the leaders. Well, I actually always get hired by the leaders. They're the ones that can sign the checks. But so usually their perspective on what's happening in the organization is usually not at all what's really happening. And sometimes it's even the leader that's the problem. Right. So unless I get all of these perspectives, I will not really understand what is happening in the organization. Right. So that's the first thing I do.
What happens then?
So then after I then assess and come back and say, now I understand what's really happening here, then I come back and I present what I would like to do with the leaders. And I say, these are some of the presenting issues, and here are the topics that I can cover. And usually I will then perform my work in a workshop type setting. And I may, I don't like to just come in and do one workshop and leave, because I really don't think that you can affect organizational change with one workshop. So what I would suggest is a series of different kinds of workshops, maybe even lunch and learns to infuse, to keep the information alive, to keep the process going on an ongoing basis, and see people over a period of time, and work on not only applying positive psychology, but also working to consult with the leaders on, things that they need to be doing and things that they need to be putting in place, whether it's structural changes or human resource changes, in order to ensure that the blocks, the things that are blocking progress, are taken care of.
Right. So can you give me an example of a process like that?
Yes. So working with an organization, I came in, did a full assessment, realized that the organization had just gone through a major change, so there were some morale issues. My my first inclination was that not the head executive director of the organization, but the next level director of the organization was causing a lot of issues. Not because they were a bad person, but they just weren't doing their job. They weren't accountable, they didn't respond to people, they didn't get back to people in a timely fashion. And people started to, instead of, they didn't feel heard, so they started to lash out and behave erratically. So from the leadership standpoint, it looks like these people are just behaving badly without realizing that in fact they were frustrated because this person was not doing their job.
Right.
And it was the second in command who was consulting with the executive director, so he was only hearing this person's perspective. Right?
Yeah.
And then seeing the bad behavior.
Yeah.
So it was once that came about and I was able to collect this, and there were other issues as well that we uncovered that were then dealt with as well. But once people started, and what I did was I continued to speak to a group of people who became my advisors throughout the organization, and they started to see, aha, somebody's listening, and they're getting to the top, and they're making change. And so then you started to see a shift in people. They sort of felt, good. I don't need to be screaming to be heard anymore. And then the behavior started to change. But then I also gave them tools, so when you're in a conflict, here is a way that you can deal with your conflict in a more productive way. You don't have to be yelling at people to get over this conflict. And so, here's a tool. And here's another tool. Tools on how to deal with stress of the change and everything that was going on with the organization. So, all these changes were taking place, and they felt that they still had to maintain this high level of excellence. And it's, how can you reframe this? How can you reset a standard? How can you say, look, I'm doing my best, and that's all I can do? So it was around mental strategies as well on how to manage the stress so that you don't have these emotional outbreaks.
Right.
And so what I did was I did that through a series of workshops, but then I continued to come back every 6 weeks to do a lunch and learn with the group, to take certain things I had done with them and take it deeper. And every time I did a workshop with them, I would say, what do you want next? What's next? What do you need? And I would have an idea, and it's very interesting because I would have an idea, and then they would say, this is what we need, and I'd say, aha, I thought so.
Right.
And then I would come in and do a lunch and learn. And then 6 weeks later, I'd come in at another team meeting and do something else. And then, 3 months later, I'd come in and do another, full day retreat with them and take them away. But all the while also working with the leaders of the organization to say, has this been taken care of? Have you had these meetings? Have you made this structural change? Or how is this coming along? To be a sounding board.
Yeah.
And sometimes one time I was talking to a leader, and I made a joke because he was going through such a hard time with a few people in his organization, and I made a joke, and we laughed and laughed and laughed, and he just said, thank you for the humor, because sometimes, you're just so stressed out from all these problems. It's really nice to just laugh about it sometimes. So that's sort of, that's an example of how I might, come in and do something like that.
And the assessments that you use, what types of assessments? Positive assessments? Or?
Yeah, so with some of the assessments that I use the VIA. I do use the VIA within organizations, especially when we are talking about resilience, topics of resilience. I find that VIA is a great tool to use. It doesn't always work in corporations. Sometimes I might just use the language around VIA, in terms of giving people a list of what the strengths are, and we do some exercises around that. So I might just use the language as opposed to the assessment. Because with 240 questions, I find it kind of, some organizations find it kind of onerous.
Right.
I use the StrengthsFinder 2.0, which corporations love, and they love to talk about it. They also love to talk about how they can change their particular job and do some job crafting around the StrengthsFinder assessment. I have used the optimism score, you know, where people would take a look at their own optimism level, and then we might do some workshops or interventions around explanatory style, around, you know, how do you change your ways of thinking around things to be more optimistic. So I would say that those are the assessments that I use the most.
And how do you use them? What do you do?
How do I use them?
Yeah, what happens? You tell them to take them over the internet, the test, or?
Yes, okay, so with some organizations, for example with the VIA, I may have them do some pre-work and take the VIA score beforehand. And then we come in and debrief in a workshop session. Other times, you know, some organizations say I don't want, you know, 100 people, you know, doing the VIA, taking half an hour to do the VIA. So, and plus they just found it was way too long. And so, so what I might do is just come up with a VIA list.
Yeah.
So I've done that before.
And
with StrengthsFinder, what I do is I order the books. I get them sent directly to the organization. Everybody gets a book, and I give them instructions on how to, you know, fill out what they need to do and pull out the little code in the book, and then they do it before they come to the actual session. And people like that because they like to have a little book. Now I'm exploring Realize 2 now as well, so I've heard a lot of really good things about it. I did a radio show with Robert Biswas-Diener, and I took the assessment, and I really like it. I like this whole idea of exploring unrealized strengths. So that's probably an assessment. I have also some colleagues who have done some of the training around Realize 2. And then so far the feedback has been very positive. Yeah. And so I think that is a tool that I would like to explore a little bit more.
And what happens when they had the list, or when they filled out the assessment? What happened? How do you debrief it?
So I debrief it in a group setting. So, for example, with the StrengthsFinder, I get everybody's permission to share their strengths, because I think it's really important on a team. One of the best and most valuable things of doing StrengthsFinder or VIA in a team environment is for me to know more about you, and me to know more about all of my teammates. And, you know, for example, I might put all of the strengths up around the room on a flip chart, you know, like a achiever and woo and, you know, and all the other strengths on a flip chart. And then I give everybody 5 colored sticky notes, and they write their name on all 5, and then they go around the room and they put their name underneath the 5 top strengths that they have. And it's a very interesting discussion, and people go around the room and they see who's under which one. And it's a very interesting discussion to see where the holes are. Where are there no sticky notes? Where are there a lot of sticky notes? Does that make sense? You know, I was working with a counseling organization, and there's a lot of sticky notes under empathy. Well, of course, right? As counselors, they need to be empathetic. So that would make sense, you know. Or they say, well, this is where we fall short, and look, there's no one under strategic, you know. So we sort of go about our merry way, but sometimes we get lost with a vision or whatever, and look, nobody's there. Maybe that's where we need to hire people, you know, to come in and help us with things like that. So it can be that kind of discussion, but also I get people to talk about, you know, how do they use this strength? You know, how have they used it in the past? Give us an example. I ask other people in the room to say, you know, so Bob here says that positivity is his #1 strength. When have you experienced Bob's strength of positivity? And people will say, you know, oh, when we did that project, you did this, this, and this. And then the person is reminded, oh yes, I did do that. And so it makes it, there's a sense of self-confidence. People emerge from that with a sense of self-confidence that they're good at something. And then other people have also recognized it. And so they emerge from these sessions feeling really good about themselves and their teammates. And then we take the conversation to the next level, where we say, given the challenges that we have of the future, you know, how do you see, who do you think is really going to help, given what their strengths are? Or how do you think you're going to use your strength to see you through the next 6 to 12 months, you know, or 18 months? So it's about also future, you know, forward-looking on, you know, how they can use their strengths in the future.
And have you used the other assessments in other ways? Or the VIA in other ways?
So the VIA I usually use in resilience type. So, you know, so let's talk about your top 5, but how have you used, when did you use it in the past to get you through a really hard time? How can you do that now in this situation, now that you're going through this hard time? How can you use it again, you know, to get you through this hard time? And I do a lot of work with Shannon Pauly, and Shannon brought to my attention this this resilience case study. It's, I believe, out of the Positiv Organizational Scholarship Organization, the Ross Michigan School of Business. And I believe it was written by Jane Dutton, and it's called the Joseph White Resilience Case Study. I don't know if I have the title. You could probably Google it, Joseph White. And it's a whole case study around Joseph White, who was the interim president of the university. And he had done really exceptionally well. And then when they went to choose their president, they didn't choose him. And he delivered a speech about disappointment and how disappointed he was. But he did it in a way that showed such resilience and such positive view that he was going to take this not as something that would affect him negatively, but that it would help him, make him stronger, and give him a new perspective. And in fact, I believe 6 months later, he became the president of another university. And so we talk about how his perspective actually helped him become president somewhere else and not go into a downward spiral. So the case study is a fabulous tool that I use. I get people to read the case study before they come in, and they're just so amazed at his ability to be able to see this hugely disappointing thing in his life with such an excellent perspective of resilience. And then we use the VIA language around what character strengths are you seeing in Joseph White, you know, as he does that. And so it's a great little tool that I use in my resilience workshops.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you use positive interventions, like some of the traditional ones or other ones?
Like, you know, 3 good things and things like that. I teach some positive interventions, like, for example, ACR, the active constructive responding, you know, in a workshop setting, and then we practice it and things like that.
How do you practice it?
Well, I'll do a whole facilitated exercise. First, I introduce what is ACR. And then I give an example. I might demonstrate what it is, and then after that I actually have them try it out. Right. So I have them role play in practicing ACR.
Right.
And then I sometimes use the ABCDE method as well. And again, I do exactly the same thing. I teach them the concept of what it is. I then have them I'll demonstrate it, then I'll have them actually contemplate it and reflect on how they might use it, and then I have them actually do a role play on how they would actually do it and use it. So, so that's, you know, those are, I think, some of the common interventions. I've created my own interventions. as well my own processes around how to deal with conflict. I have stress reduction strategies that I use, so I use my own interventions there, that are not commonly known in positive psychology, that I've just developed over the years.
And can you tell me a little bit about them? How have you developed them?
So, well, it's just, over time, I've just developed these tools over time working with organizations on how to, deal with conflict. And there are my own little processes that I use, or stress reduction, I use exercises. I take people, a lot of what I do in facilitation is taking people through an experience so that afterwards they say, I understand now, I get this now.
And how do you know that you want it this way and not that way? Like, how do you develop the intervention? How do you find out that you rather wanted the process to be like this? Do you have any principles you follow, or theories you use, or what do you do?
Yeah, I might start off with the concept, but after 16 years of trying it with all different groups, you learn, okay, that didn't work, right? Or this piece worked, this piece didn't work. So I change it, and I try it with another, group, right? And then I say, this worked much better, but still could be even better if I add this. Right? And then slowly over 16 years, there are some exercises that you do that work every time. That every time you do it, you say, that is exactly what I want people to experience when I bring them through this, and that is like it never fails after a while.
What positive psychology interventions never fail? Or processes?
That never. Well, the ABCDE. That, to me, I think everybody, and it's really cognitive behavioral therapy, that you're taking people through. And I think that exercise in itself is something that everybody should learn, And I first started using that method through David Burns. And he doesn't use ABCDE, he uses, David Burns in his book, Feeling Good, has a 3-step process that he takes you through. And I really have always really liked his methods. And I used that for, many, many years. And I see the ABCDE technique sort of similar to that.
Right. And other things that always work?
In positive psychology? One thing that I really, when I'm doing well-being workshops, the positivity ratio, I find is an easy concept for people to sort of hold on to. And we talk about how can you eliminate, it's not about eliminating all the negative in your life, it's about eliminating the unnecessary negative. And I find that people really resound with that. They really like that whole idea around, I guess I didn't have to yell at that guy for cutting me off on the highway, or, I guess I'm not going to watch that show on, a guy dismembering bodies for an hour, like maybe I don't need to fill my head with all those negative things. Maybe, the negative things that come up in my life are enough, for me to handle, in terms of managing energy, as opposed to, managing time, right? It's about how can I manage my positive energy. So talking to people about their positivity ratio and improving their positivity ratio, I find those discussions are very enlightening. Other exercises that I do in well-being are around, your bucket list, right? How can you start something that you have as a dream, to become more engaged in life, right? I talk about things like altruism. What are you doing to improve, different things that you're doing in the community, for example, to add greater meaning into your life. So I don't know if you'd call them interventions, but they're more discussions around how can we increase positive emotions, how can we increase engagement, how can we have better relationships, greater meaning in our lives. The discussions I have a lot around accomplishment is around self-efficacy. How can I improve confidence? One new tool that I've just started to explore, I'm doing my certificate in solution-focused coaching. And, you know, we don't learn about solution-focused coaching in the MAPP degree, but I really find that it aligns very well with the positive psychology perspective. And so in some of the questions around solution-focused coaching really gives you a new perspective, but also builds confidence, because you're asking questions to remind people of what they've done in the past, what they've done well in the past. And I just find that is a new tool that I'm just starting to use that I really love. And I have started to use some of the questions with my managers too, so that they can work more effectively with their people to build confidence on a regular basis by just asking, you know, some very, very simple questions of their people. So I'm really, really loving that tool. And
when you use the tools, you say you talk about them, you discuss them. What do you do? So if you introduce a tool?
Like, say for example, if I'm introducing the solution-focused coaching tool, I may give them a series of questions. I first of all introduce the whole concept of solution-focused coaching, the whole concept around the questioning, and then I might say give them a scenario and give them a role play and say, you know, so and so has just come to you upset that they failed, you know, in this sales. If it's a sales team, I always use relevant scenarios, right? So Bob has just come to you because he lost his biggest client, you know. What are some solution-focused questions? You know, use the solution-focused questions now to help him to solve this problem and overcome, you know, the emotional side of what he's going through. But it's very much, how do you get them to solve their own problem? Because when they do that, they feel this sense of self-confidence and self-efficacy. Whereas some managers always feel they have to solve the problems, and it doesn't help their people to feel a sense of accomplishment, to feel better about what they're doing, to feel more confident so they can take their skills to the next level if you're always solving everybody's problems. So, you know, that's how I usually teach some of these concepts about, it's more about training them on how they can use these positive interventions with their people.
One of the questions that Robert wanted me to ask people was that if you were sharing knowledge of research and models and theories when you work, or if you only ask coaching questions.
So no, I usually share the theory and the model behind it as well, to let people know, you know, how it works, because I think it's important too to give people an understanding of why it works and the mechanisms behind it.
Right.
So yes.
So what do you do?
So I might on the PowerPoint slide show the model, you know, or go take them through the theory. So typically it's some sort of knowledge building on what it is, what the theory is, and then we move into an exercise that would demonstrate the practical application of it and allow them to practice it.
Right.
So that's usually how it's followed.
Right.
Sort of like theory and then practice.
Is that how you always work, or you only do it sometimes, not other times?
No, often, yeah, I would say typically in a workshop, that's typically, unless I'm doing some sort of warm-up that's just intended to create positive emotions or shift a change in perspective or something like that, in which case I'm using the positive intervention to create the environment in which I'm trying to facilitate it.
Right.
But other than that, if I'm doing skill building, I typically do tell the theory behind it, yes.
Right. And do you ever change some of the theories or models or assessments to adapt them to the clients or the context?
Sometimes I combine them, you know, like for example, with ACR, with active constructive responding, which is something really studied with couples, right, and in relationships. I might take the concept of ACR and combine it with Dweck's model of the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. So how can you give active, constructive feedback, for example, as a manager, using process praise versus person praise. So sometimes, you know, some of those things mesh very well together.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't always just use them on their own. Again, it's about testing to see what works with different groups.
Yeah. And what do you do to kind of, it's because in the psychotherapy research there are some factors that seem to be important for the outcome, and I don't know if it's the same for groups, but you do something special to gain credibility or to give positive psychology credibility or the way that you work?
Often, you know, initially when we piloted our programs as part of our capstone, we talked a lot about positive psychology, you know, and the science and everything else. But over the years, I've found it's just not helpful. It's, I don't think you need to tell people this is positive psychology. So I just move forward and do it without really saying that it's sometimes I might say I draw from positive psychology. I do in my bio, for example, I would say I have a Master of Applied Positive Psychology. If I'm doing a well-being workshop, then yes, I do mention positive psychology because that lends a lot of credibility to it. But in a business environment, sometimes saying positive psychology people sort of take it in different ways. I find in nonprofit environments, they love the whole idea of positive psychology. Right. But in really hard-nosed business environments, you know, positive psychology doesn't really, the words don't really help me. I might say, you know, the science of human motivation, right? Yeah. Which is a component of positive psychology, right? Or the study of human engagement, yeah. Which is, you know, again, of a division of positive psychology, right? All the study of flow and everything else. So I might use those kinds of words, right, that resound more in business.
And what do you do to have good relationships with your clients when you're working with them?
What do I do to have good relationships?
Yeah, because at least in psychotherapy research, it seems that the relationship is really important for the outcome.
Yeah.
So do you do anything special to have a good relationship, to build it, to maintain it?
Well, I guess to me it's about trust. So it is about credibility and trust. You know, do you have the credibility to be able to create the outcomes that you want? So it is about establishing that and establishing trust. But I think as a facilitator in a group, the best thing I can do is to stay completely objective. So there's no judgments at any time. It's just about facilitating the person through the process. So the more I can stay completely separate from people's, disagreeing of it, or, you know, I find the more effective I can be.
Do you do something to help your clients progress towards their goals, like when you're not seeing them?
Oh, yes. So I might, yes, what I do at the end of every workshop or every lunch and learn or some intervention, I always create an action plan. So, you know, how are you different as a result of this workshop? What has shifted for you? What is an insight? I get everyone to share an insight at the end of the session. And then I say, I want you to commit to one thing you're going to start next week. And by when, and we share, and we do a public sharing of, you know, one thing that you might do in the future. Yeah.
Do you do other things to help them move forward?
Well, it really depends. If you're working with people on well-being, then you might have them do a particular activity, and then you debrief, you know, a week later. I'm in a wellness program I'm working on. We actually have the whole team do activities. So I facilitate how it's going to work. I give them all the instructions, and then they go off and they do the activity. And then, the following week they have a new activity to do. That's going to do something different. So, yeah.
And what's their feedback to you when they've been through some positive psychology coaching, or what do they say?
Well, so with the work I do, when you're trying to create organizational change, there's sort of the initial feedback of, oh, great workshop, really enjoyed it. You sort of have a high after the workshop. And then they go back to the same structure or the same things again, or a manager will say, oh, well, I don't necessarily believe that. And so the whole team is pumped up, and then the manager can crush it by saying, oh, it's not aligned with my philosophy, even though the manager was the one who hired me, Like it's things like that you cannot control after that, right? You can't control how the organization. So the feedback that I like to get is over several months, right? Where I like to hear back and say, well, how's it working now? And what's changed? And how have things shifted? And as you go back into the organization, you can start to see, shifts in the organization. So, that's the kind of feedback that I really love. Or, I went back to a workshop with a client I've been working with for a while, and one of the gentlemen said, I implemented this idea as a result of your last workshop. And I'm like, oh, great, and how's it working? He said, oh, it's working really well, and this is what's happening, and he had some ideas. So it was, it takes time. You have to be patient, and it takes time, and you, as a facilitator, as a coach, all you can do is facilitate the process. It's then up to the person to do something about it.
Yeah. What do you think causes the changes? Like, what could be the mechanisms?
That's a really good question. In the work I do, the leaders are so critical, and there's a lot of research that suggests that if the leaders are on board with it, that the change process becomes so much easier. So I think leaders have a huge impact, and if leaders then can influence a few key influential followers in the organization, that certainly is a true critical success factor as well. And I think it's this sense of empowerment. Give people, when people say, well, I can't do that, I can't go and talk to my manager. It's about breaking down beliefs. It's, why can't you go talk to your manager? Is there, what's stopping you? Well, we just don't do that here. I said, it's things like that where you challenge these deep-rooted beliefs in people, and then leave it up to them.
And for yourself, how do you develop as a professional? What do you do?
I practice a lot of positive psychology and resilience.
In your own life?
Yeah, because running your own business can be very hard. You sometimes have, we're starting the Canadian Positive Psychology Association, and you have your ups and downs, and some people are for it and some people are against you, and it's so you have to really be committed to what you're doing around positive psychology. I really feel strongly, even if it's not exactly positive psychology, it's just this philosophy of our mental health has to be on the health agenda. We have to be doing something to take care of our minds. That, to me, is just my overarching passionate goal, is to educate people around how to nurture their mental well-being, how to have a healthy, it's not just about smiley faces and being happy all the time. It's about just allowing people to feel good, to feel engaged in life, to feel their life has meaning, and to engage in positive relationships, and to take care of themselves psychologically, you know. And so I use many different tools to do that. It's not just positive psychology. I use many different tools to be able to do that. And then so that my passion is what drives me. That's what takes care of me. And then I use the tools myself, you know, to keep strong, to stay strong, to keep out there, to talk to more people, get more clients, you know, because if I don't have clients, I don't have a I don't have a business, right?
And some people who have asked me if I could ask the ones I interview, what can they say? What makes positive psychology coaching different? Like, if you want to get clients, what can you say? What is special about positive psychology coaching? Is it special? And if it is, what makes it special?
Well, I had one client who was looking at a few different consultants who asked me, you know, how are you different? And I said, my approach is not a deficits-based approach. It's an appreciative approach that looks at the strengths of the organization and builds on those strengths, rather than always taking a look at what's wrong. And so it's about what's right with the organization. And I say, you know, it's not that I don't look at what's wrong. I think that's important too. It's just not a huge focus of what I do. So it's about leveraging people's positive emotional energy to make change within organizations and improve performance. So that's how I say, you know, it's different, you know, than other types of coaching.
Right. And are there anything we have not talked about that are important to understand the way that you work? Some things that I've forgotten or don't know about?
Oh, weren't you going to ask me how do you keep up to date?
Yeah.
Or something?
Yeah, how you develop as a professional.
Was that part of that question?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, because, you know, what I do is I write for Positive Psychology News Daily. And I find that helps develop me as a professional, because it sort of makes me read a book or look into a certain theory or something that I'm curious about. It sort of structures me into continuing on with that, you know, with learning more and researching more and staying in touch with different organizations to get more information. I also run a positive psychology think tank, so I share with other practitioners, because just because they don't do positive psychology doesn't mean that their approaches are better, you know, than positive psychology, or you know, positive psychology coaching is not better than other approaches. It's just different. It's just a different approach. So I like to hear, you know, how other people approach things and get their ideas. And so that's another way that I sort of expand my thinking. I used to think that positive psychology was, you know, everything, and then you realize it's not. You know, like, get realistic about it. And so, yeah, so I like to keep an open mind and always be challenging my ideas around stuff.
And if you should give advice to some other people who are new to this field, who want to learn how to do positive psychology coaching, based on your experience, what would be good advice?
I would say listen to your client first, you know, because you might listen to them and say the positive psychology approach is not what they need, right? You know, positive psychology is not the answer to every problem that you're going to encounter with your clients. So listen first, and then see if it's a good fit before you suggest that you're going to start working with your client. Or, you know, I have many other tools in my toolkit. It's not just positive psychology. And I'll go in and talk to a client, and then I'll say, no, it's not positive psych they need, it's this they need right now. And I'll use those tools instead. I might do it with, you know, some of my knowledge of positive psychology, but, you know, I don't lead with that every time. I let the client tell me first what they need, and then I determine how I'm going to approach it. So I think that's very important, is to listen more than you talk.
Yeah.
When you're trying to figure it out. And then, and then it's about building your practice around. Another thing I've really learned is to build a practice around what you love. And you know what, I know it sounds corny and do what you love and the money will follow, and I never believed that. I thought, that's, phony, baloney, But over the years, that's true.
Right.
That when I just did stuff for the pure love of it, it became just so natural, and I was just so good at it and really loved doing it, that then I got thing after thing after thing and referrals. And that's when you say, now the money's just flowing in, because I'm just consistently doing a really good job at something I'm passionate about. So that's a piece of advice that I would tell people, is just keep plugging away. My friend Adrian says, chop wood, carry water.
Right.
Yeah.
Other things that we have not talked about that are important to understand the way that you work?
I would say another thing that I do a lot is I really have gotten good at finding information. So if I'm doing a piece on something, like taking a search database. When I was younger, I did a lot of work in computers, and I learned how to search databases like a librarian kind of thing. That skill has been hugely, hugely helpful. And people will even email me and say, Louisa, I can't find this paper on whatever. Can you find a copy for me? I'll find it. Even if it's hidden somewhere, I'll somehow figure out how to get my hands on it. Or find some people say, how do you find this stuff? And it's like, it's just that knowledge of knowing how to search a database, and it's all comes from technology, that I think has been invaluable for the past 20 years, really.